Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Jakubowicz and I'm your, I think, Master of Ceremonies for this evening. It would be really great if whoever has their mic on that doesn't turn it on could turn it off so that we don't get little bings every time somebody joins the group. We're expecting literally hundreds of people. So it will sound a bit like a machine gun if we don't turn our mics off. Thank you very much. Can I welcome you here tonight? I'm here in my role as a person who's been involved with the contribution.
Yeah.
I think we could turn our mics off, please. Thank you, because they're pinging. Thank you very much. I was also one of the consultants on the Cultural Diversity Plan, and it's been a very interesting journey, I think, for everyone involved. In opening the meeting, I'd like to recognise and acknowledge the Bidjigal and Gadigal people, traditional owners of the land on whom we're meeting, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We meet on Aboriginal land, always was, is and will always be. And I want to say thank you to Waverley, to the original owners of this land and all those who came after, for welcoming my parents as refugees over 75 years ago to a little flat in Warners Avenue in North Bondi. Lola, could I invite you to welcome to country?
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lola Ryan. I am a Dharawal elder from the La Perouse Aboriginal community of Botany Bay, and we belong to the Dharawal language group. I would like to start by acknowledging and paying my respects to my elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here this evening. It's my pleasure to be here to welcome you to the launch of Waverley Council's Cultural Diversity, and would like to thank them for the great work that they do for all the community. Traditionally, we would welcome other tribes to our land through ceremony and inform them of resources such as food and water. As they would enter, they would see rock carvings, paintings, tracks that let them know what kind of resources are available in that particular area. Aboriginal culture had an oral language and would communicate through storytelling, art, song and dance. As there are many Aboriginal language groups throughout Australia, today we still use those methods of the storytelling, art, song and dance in both a traditional and contemporary way to teach our children their culture, and to be sure it is still thriving for generations to come. Our people and culture have survived for over 60,000 years and are one of the oldest living cultures in the world, and we will survive for many generations more. On behalf of the La Perouse Local Aboriginal Land Council, my ancestors, my elders and my community, I would like to wish you a warm welcome and hope that you have a great evening. And thank you very much for having me. I hope your plans and your meeting goes well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lola. And in the language of my parents, they were using when they arrived in Sydney, Jinkuya Batsa. Now, can I turn to the welcome to the procedures of the evening? The purpose of tonight is to launch the cultural diversity strategy and the plans associated with them for Waverley Council. We're going to have a number of speakers who are going to comment on the issues and take us through some of the roadways, the pathways of these journeys. And then we're going to have, towards the end, hopefully 20 minutes of Q&A. And as your numbers grow, that managing that particular Q&A is going to become more and more exciting. In the meantime, though, can I introduce our panelists very quickly? The first panelist is the Mayor of Waverley, Paula Marcellus, who has been an old colleague of mine for many, many years. And I'm very proud to have worked with her on the project and to have been brought into it. Joseph Laposta, who's hiding there somewhere in the audience, behind the screen, the CEO of Multicultural New South Wales, where I spent some years on the advisory board, and who has been playing an extraordinary role in the process of keeping in contact with and supporting the New South Wales multicultural communities during the last 2 years of the pandemic. He's going to be talking to us about the important role that local government plays in the whole cultural diversity story. The third panelist is Craig Foster, who many of you will know, who has been a hero of the human rights and cultural diversity movements in Australia. And I'll introduce him a bit more later on. And the speaker who, from my team, I guess, who've been part of the actual process of putting this plan together, is Sarah Riley, who is the head of Cred Consulting, who is the main consulting company. And we'll hear from her later on as well. So can I begin by inviting Paula, the Mayor of Waverley, to talk to us about context of the strategy and to now. Paula.
Oh, Paula,
you
you're
might
on
need to
mute.
Unmute. We can read your lips, but we can't hear you.
The great war cry of the 21st century. You are on mute. I was going to say, Efkaristo para Puli. Thank you so much, Professor Jakubowicz, for those kind words of introduction. And I also want to especially thank Auntie Lola Ryan for your very warm welcome to country. I too would like to acknowledge the Bidjigal and Gadigal people who traditionally occupied the Sydney coast, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present, and emerging. I have to say, I am so honoured and excited to have so many people join us tonight at this really, what I consider to be a very important launch of a very important document, our Waverley cultural diversity strategy, because a lot of people don't necessarily consider Waverley to be a very multicultural place, but of course it is. But before we start, I also want to thank our guest panelists, Craig Foster and Joe Laposta. And in fact, Joe and I had some, a couple of meetings about the role of local government in this space. And I'm really pleased that, Joe, you could join us tonight and actually witness exactly what we've been able to do with with the consultancy of Creda and with Professor Jakubowicz. And I also want to acknowledge your leadership in this area. Now, there are lots of community leaders here tonight, and I have been blown away by just how many of our leaders have joined us tonight. But I particularly wanted to acknowledge just a couple of people. Peter Shergold, I gather, is joining us, who is now the Chancellor of the University of Western Sydney. He's had a very illustrious career in the public service, but I knew Peter a long time ago. I think, Andrew, you did as well, when Peter was actually involved with the Federation of Ethnic Communities Councils many years ago. We also have with us Elizabeth Wing, who is from the Anti-Discrimination New South Wales. Thank you so much for joining us, Elizabeth. And we also have Rabbi Castell, Rabbi Slavin. We have members of the Reconciliation Action Plan Advisory Committee, members of our Arts and Culture Committee, and of course our Multicultural Advisory Committee. And I must acknowledge Emily Scott, our GM. I think we also have Councillor Sally Betts here, who is a colleague. And I also want to acknowledge, thank you. I don't think there are any other councillors here, but if I do see any more, I will acknowledge them as they join us. But I generally want to thank all my fellow councillors who've been so supportive of this really important strategy. We got through council unanimously. Now, being the daughter of Greek immigrants, it's fair to say that cultural diversity is a topic very close to my heart, which has shaped my commitment to civic life and my leadership career more generally. Having worked in the anti-discrimination and cultural diversity space for, gosh, almost 40 years now, including being a commissioner for the Ethnic Affairs Commission and the Community Relations Commission, which were precursors to Multicultural New South Wales. The Waverley area is home to almost 40% of people born overseas. Millions of people also work in the area and enjoy our beaches and other outdoor spaces each year. And here at Waverley Council, our councillors and our staff have been committed to cultural diversity for a long time. However, with rising polarisation and intolerance across the world, we needed to demonstrate stronger leadership to contribute to measurable improvements in making our community more inclusive and socially resilient. Local government, in my view, is the purest form of participatory democracy and hence the closest touch point of any level of government with communities. And as such, Waverley Council, I believe, has a responsibility to build and maintain a community where people from all backgrounds feel welcome and can contribute, recognising that this will benefit everyone. Our new cultural diversity strategy was developed with input from the community and Council's Multicultural Advisory Committee in collaboration with representatives from local organisations and peak bodies who have joined us tonight, as I've said. The strategy sets out a vision and a roadmap for Council to help make Waverley a better place to live, visit, work or study for everybody. The strategy, which will be presented by Sarah from Cred Consulting later this evening, gives our staff across Council clear, immediate directions, but also provides spaces to co-create solutions with partners and the community as we progress together in this journey. I really want to emphasise that it is only through collaboration that we can create a better future and tackle entrenched problems such as racism. And I'm really honoured and thrilled to have been one of the sponsors to help develop this really important document. So I look forward to the achievements that we will achieve together with the leadership of our General Manager, Emily Scott, who has joined us tonight. Welcome, Emily. And thank you to all the people who have contributed to it, particularly to our MC, Professor Andrew Jakubowicz, Cred Consulting, our Multicultural Advisory Committee, and Council's community program teams, and in particular, Rebecca Rodwell and Madly Bodlin. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the papers and to having a really good conversation. Thank you, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Paula. That was great. And setting the context, I think, and the scene moving forward, because what we're now talking about is not our past, so that's important, but we're talking about our future and how we're going to live that together in a challenging and demanding world. It's good to see so many people here, and also particularly to see the support from deep in the council for all of these priorities that are starting to emerge. Can I turn now to introduce the first of our speakers, Joseph LaPosta. He's the Chief Executive, as I mentioned, of Multicultural New South Wales. Prior to this, he worked in executive leadership roles in corporate, not-for-profit government. That's interesting, okay. He was involved as well in Australian football and Sport New South Wales. And he brought a certain degree of combative, what do we call it, creativity to understanding and reworking what New South Wales needed in terms of multicultural direction. And I've been very proud to have worked with him in the past, and I'm very glad he's been able to join us tonight. Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. That's a tough act to follow, and I apologise for the meeting noise going off in the background. Can I just acknowledge that the multicultural fabric of this society has been alive and well for 65,000 years, and it's always really important when we talk about our modern multicultural chapter that both Paula and Andrew have touched on. We recognise the many diverse different communities and languages that have existed on this land. So I'd like to commence by just acknowledging the traditional custodians. For me, it's the land of the Wongal people of the Great Eora Nation, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I can hear someone might not be on mute that might be on the phone, so it might help if you just chuck us on mute. Not that it bothers me, but it might bother some of the others. Can I just say that I'm a Victorian originally. Don't hold that against me. I can see a few of you smiling. And my first place in New South Wales that I ever lived was Bondi. And I was desperate, Emily Scott, to come and work for your council at the time as a town planner. But I had to settle for Wallara, just down the road. And one of the reasons that I loved Bondi, other than the fact that I'm from Melbourne and it's clearly Bondi, was that on any single day in the street that I first lived in, and I lived in a few in Bondi and North Bondi, you could hear Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, Hebrew, Mandarin. The languages were so extensive, and it just, for me, epitomises such a successful multicultural society. And Andrew touched on my experience briefly at the AFL before. One of the misconceptions that I was determined to blow apart was that the Swans, who were proudly based in the eastern suburbs, were responsible for looking after the East, and the Giants had the multicultural communities of Western Sydney. And I remember haranguing the then Mayor, Sally Betts, and Sally, it's great to see you on the call today, to insist that she lets me put goalposts on Waverley Oval so that I could prove to so many different communities right across Sydney just how culturally diverse the city of Waverley is. And I'll touch on that in a moment because I am very pleased, but also humbled to be here tonight. I'm also very humbled that I walk on the shoulders of a lot of great people, and both Andrew and Paula are former commissioners at the Community Relations Commission, which is the chapter before Multicultural New South Wales. But I also note people like Ernie Friedlander on the call, people like Takan, who are leading a really modern and progressive chapter, and also Dr. Patricia Jenkins, who both her and I sit on the board of the United Nations Association of Australia. And it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the fabulous work. And I know Craig draws a lot of media attention wherever he goes, but underpinning that media attention is just an absolute commitment to grassroots access and equity for all communities. And Craig, I know you and I have bumped into each other a couple of times, but please don't ever think that there's probably not a week that goes by where we don't admire the work that you're doing with organisations like Addie Road and UNHCR and so many others. So keep it up, mate. I've been asked to speak just briefly about the role of local government in supporting cultural diversity, and I can't understate it. Paula talked before and stole absolutely some of the gold that I was going to touch on. So I'll rephrase what I was going to say. What I will say is, for a lot of new and emerging communities that come to this country, they don't really understand the three tiers of government. They understand there is a government. And for many of them, the most accessible level of government is local government. And I don't even use the word tiers because I think that at times it creates a sense of grandeur or hierarchy. I actually prefer the term spheres. And we are determined to work very, very closely with local government from a multicultural New South Wales point of view, because you are very much the shop front and the first port of call for government. And the role of local government in supporting our culturally diverse communities and enabling them, and ultimately enabling them to thrive and settle in place, is enormous. Your services that you provide in terms of your shop front, the safe and important and critical community facilities that you enable for groups to be able to come together and congregate. And Andrew talked about his migrant history and his proud past before, but I think for all of us that have a migrant background, those very, very, very first locations where our communities would have come together and started the very entities or the incorporations that today underpin so many different fabric parts of our society. And I think of the Italian business chambers, some of my community that are so proud of, would have started at some of those local community halls in the local councils. And for you still today, with so many competing demands for access to your assets and astronomical maintenance costs and capital costs to make those facilities available for our new and emerging communities and also our established communities, I just say thanks. Andrew did talk about the future, and Waverley's diversity strategy shows us that a council that is committed to fostering a community in which all people of all cultures belong. And I say all cultures, but I also talk about the very rich religious and also linguistic diversity that we share in New South Wales. I'm especially impressed by the many practical measures that the strategy list outlines. These include providing increased training and learning opportunities for council staff to build their knowledge and understanding of visitors, and most importantly, difference. And I think if you talk to any leader in business today, and I'm sure Emily's one of them, ultimately you want a composition of your workforce that does or aspires to mirror the community that it's there to serve. And I am going to be dogmatic, and Andrew touched on this before, in my pursuit to make sure that the public service mirrors the communities of of New South Wales. We are one of the most culturally and linguistically states on earth, and we've got a long way to go as a state government in terms of the composition of our workforce, particularly at senior leadership levels. And I'm so pleased to see that council's called that out as part of your strategy. The importance of practically working in partnership with the communities and cultural organisations to deliver and support programs, events and festivals that encourage intercultural connections and understanding. Our events and festivals are a very important part of our continuum of a multicultural society, and they should never be underestimated as an entree for people to be able to experience and understand difference. Developing in collaboration with its hard-working Multicultural Advisory Committee, and I can see a number of them here, a public space campaign to share positive messages that promote inclusion and condemn racism, and exploring how it can improve cultural awareness, education and resources within the council. Early education being one, family care and services being another, critical elements to help not just individuals but families thrive in place. Can I just say on behalf of Multicultural New South Wales, we applaud the council. Please know that you have a willing partner to walk with you going forward. We are very, very proud of our Stronger Together 2021-2025 strategic plan. It is an action-orientated plan, and that was something that I had to fight very hard for. I didn't want just a glossy document that sat on a shelf. I wanted it to be accountable to you and the communities that you represent to actually do things. And it is so pleasing to see the congruence and alignment between some of the things in our plan and our vision, and also this at a local government. So I'll stop there because I'm very mindful that there's far more important people to speak than I. But just on behalf of the New South Wales government and certainly my agency, Multicultural New South Wales, thank you all of you for your hard work, but also remind you that the hard work is also in the doing. And so from here, please know that we will partner with you and walk forward. Thanks, Andrew.
Grazie a lei, Giuseppe. Thank you very much, Joe. That was fantastic. And I'm looking forward to that the linked hands going forward into the future. It's going to be a continuing series of challenges. So it's good to know that the strength and the focus is there. Can I turn now to Sarah Riley, who is the head of CRED Consulting. CRED and I discovered one another through a dear friend of ours, Dr. Google. And from that point on, it was a great relationship, I think. I hope they did too. So I'm going to invite Sarah now, who is a strategist with over 20 years experience, to walk us through what we actually did or what actually happened in the strategy, what it contains and where it's going. So you know what the story looks like on the ground. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Is everyone seeing my screen and not everything on my desktop? Because my desktop's very messy, so that's good. Before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge the Eora people of the Gadigal Nation, which is the traditional owners of the land where I am tonight, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present also. I thought it was a really interesting comment about local government and understanding the different tiers of government. And I'd have to say, I don't know that many people in our community understand the different tiers of government, but what we do know from research is that local government is definitely the most trusted tier of government with communities. And there's a lot of research around that because you do have such close contact with your community. So I'm really excited to present to you tonight very quickly, because I know we want to have a conversation, which is much more important, just how we developed the strategy and the key themes around that. And just wanted to say that it was a privilege, as always, to work with this community and with the team at Waverley Council. So thanks very much. And Andrew, your incredible insights and knowledge and understanding of this area were amazing. So thank you. It was wonderful to work with you also. So just really, really quickly to take you through this, we did this project from October 2020 through to May 2021. And obviously this is just a little time frame, but we started with a lot of research, and we looked at the demographics of the community, how it's changed, the place characteristics, to really understand what cultural diversity looks like in the community today and what it might look like in the future. And we also looked at the big picture strategies, you know, all the way up to those United Nations goals, all the way down to the local level, and what that indicates in terms of outcomes we might deliver. I think a really interesting part of the desktop research was the work that Andrew did, looking at innovative best practice examples of what local government and other agencies are doing everywhere to support social cohesion in culturally diverse communities. And for each case study, we outlined what those lessons might be for Waverley. So that's an incredible piece of research, really, that could be used in many different ways. I think we've all learned since COVID, even more strongly, how central social cohesion is to our resilience in the face of shocks and stresses. And we've really seen a breakdown across our city of relationships. You know, Bondi's been in the news, Western Sydney's been in the news. And so really wonderful that you have a plan that can sort of address social cohesion within your community. We did stakeholder and community engagement. We spoke to around 170 people, including through an online survey, a focus group with community leaders and service providers. And Andrew did almost 30 interviews with local stakeholders and industry experts. And those in-depth interviews certainly bring out a lot of really important information. And we also reviewed findings from previous community consultation undertaken by council, and council has done quite a lot of community consultation for other strategies as well. And then with developing the strategy, we worked really strongly with internal council project control group, but across council, because a strategy is only good if it's owned by the team that are going to deliver it. And for something like a cultural diversity strategy, it has to be owned and understood in every single department of council, from the rangers who are out on the streets to the strategic planners who are developing the city. It's really important that everyone feels ownership. And we also work closely with council's multicultural advisory committee. So thank you to those members who are here tonight. What did we hear from the community? We heard some pretty common themes. We heard that Waverley residents really value living in a diverse and inclusive community and all the wonderful things that that brings. Definitely wanted to increase the recognition and visibility of Aboriginal culture and people within the community, and that visibility is really wonderful, and that connecting with country, how can we learn from this amazing culture? We want to increase opportunities to celebrate and share Waverley's diversity. We want to take a strong stand against all forms of racism and discrimination. The community wants to support Waverley's vulnerable and transient community members. We know we have a lot of people from overseas coming in and out, and during COVID, they were really vulnerable with no access to employment or temporal housing. And connect and build the capacity of our diverse community. We want to make sure that we're welcoming all those visitors to Waverley, because you have so many at your significant international beach and other areas. So what focus areas did we end up with? We ended up with 5 key focus areas. The first one was around leadership and planning. And this is about embedding consideration of cultural diversity across council's decision-making, and about strengthening partnerships with the community and other agencies. The next theme is around connected and welcoming, and it's all about building social cohesion in our community by providing opportunities for intercultural connections, and also about supporting the sharing of Waverley's culturally diverse stories. Our third area is no place for racism, and it's all about promoting harmony and inclusion in our community, and about council working in partnership to respond to community issues in a timely manner. Inclusion and equity is about ensuring council services are accessible for everyone in the community, and about supporting vulnerable community members such as international students or older people. And finally, it's about unlocking opportunities, which is about building the capacity of our culturally diverse communities and organisations, and working in partnership with the local business community. That's just a quick snapshot of the strategy. But I think we're going to have a chat tonight, and I'm available to talk about more questions as we go through. Over to you, Andrew. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, but it's better if I don't, because
we might not finish in time.
That's right. Yeah, the most dangerous thing you can do to a retired academic is ask him to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick snapshot, because I know there's lots of people want to have a good chat tonight too.
No, I think that's right, and I think there are many layers in this plan. Really quite interesting ones. It's a 10-year perspective, so it's not all going to happen next week, but it is going to happen continuously and continually into the future. And I think that's a really exciting part of recognition, because one of the things we learned about these plans is they burst forth at various points in history, and then they dissipate and disappear because the product champions disappear, or there's no longer term implementation strategy. But one of the things that's great about the Waverley one is that they know they're in it for the long term, and they know that it will be rolled out, developed, and expanded over the coming years. So that's great.
Yeah,
and
that's right, Andrew.
And particularly Ellie Spiro, who was my partner in crime in all of this. Thank you very, very much for the enormous contributions you made, and the fact you put up with me for so long. I think
I know we learned so much, and Ellie's unwell tonight. That's why she's not here. But thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, so let's then move to the final main speaker of tonight, Craig Foster. Not being a footballer, of course, I'd never heard of Craig Foster before. No, it's not true. Craig Scott has an enormous reputation. Many moons ago, I was on the board of the Special Broadcasting Service, and that left me with a very strong sense of the importance of people like Craig in the public imagination of Australia. His colleagues and what he has turned that whole role into, and more widely than that, the work he's done on the Multicultural Australia Council, and of course his extraordinary work in rescuing people in trouble overseas who are part of his network. And I think people learn an enormous amount from that. Craig, you're out there somewhere. Let me find you.
I am. I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you.
All right. Okay.
That's fantastic.
All right.
Can I introduce you then, Craig Foster? The people, Craig Foster, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a few brief comments, and then I know that we're going to take a few questions and so on, but particularly on the adoption of your cultural diversity strategy and anti-racism, a field that I have been trying to make a small contribution in the past couple of years in particular. And one of the reasons is that you just heard around my advocacy for refugees, also for Indigenous rights and the Uluru Statements and other things. And after considerable efforts with a range of organisations. Hello, how are you? Okay, that's great. All right, that's nice to know.
Okay, I know he went away. I didn't tell him to come here. It's okay. Yeah.
All right, no worries. Well, I hope that's okay. I hope you find him. So just having, advocated in these kind of spaces for quite a while, then after a while, I think for all of us, we come to a realisation that racism actually is an underlying part of so many of the issues that we have in Australia. So in particular, I wanted to congratulate you on your willingness to confront the racism we see too often here, and that so many community groups try desperately to articulate, to communicate their experiences of facing barriers of all kinds, unfair barriers based on nothing but prejudice. These minority communities are asking to be heard. They're asking us, they're asking you, they're asking to be understood, acknowledged, which is important, and of course, for action to be taken. One powerful form of action I would say, what is our stage of infancy when it comes to discussing and understanding racism, given that many extraordinarily still refuse to acknowledge either its existence or certainly the damage it causes, is making a public commitment to calling it out, as well as auditing it within our own institutions and instilling training programs to educate us all on the challenges that others face. And I include myself foremost among all of this. So Racism Not Welcome is a movement to do just this that I am in support of, and I thank you for your support. It's to make the existence of racism visible and to catalyse conversations and initiatives to explore it and ultimately play a small part in positive change. Now, as you all know, racism exists in many ways, and institutions, whether it's a council or anyone else, are a significant part of the problem and, of course, the solution. So your commitment also means auditing your own cultural and racial diversity, of course, whether at staff or governance level, and asking your community, particularly how they feel, where their barriers are faced, what they would like to see, and not simply making statements or policy on minority communities' behalf. And this, of course, we all, I think, today recognise this in relation to Indigenous Australia, but it's equally as true in regard to any multicultural minority community or religion and any form of community that we have here in this beautiful country. So to not do so on their behalf, but by involving them directly in the truth-telling and change process. So well done for taking that step. Too rarely, in my experience, do minority communities, whether on ethnicity, race, religion, get to have their say. And if they do, more rarely still they actually listen to. And now is more important than ever to ensure this occurs. Of course, as you heard, Paula, the Mayor, talking about, COVID has exacerbated fault lines in Australian society. And for the first time in decades, it's also given us a very real and a critically important sense of responsibility to each other. What I do affects you and what you do affects me. But not only regarding public health, this also goes to opportunity and access to power and voice. So as we examine the barriers that people like myself have never had to face, we actually, and I, increasingly come to realize that many of us are running a race where others are handicapped. And even though the barriers of prejudice might be invisible to you and I, and they were for a long time to me, since I wasn't affected by them, they're very real and they're extremely damaging to people's lives, to their hopes, and this accumulates to a community which is not utilizing its full creative, humanitarian or economic potential, and by extension, of course, a country. So put aside our historic and cultural reticence, acknowledge that colonization was founded on racism and exploitation, of course it was, and open ourselves to healing the breakdown in the Australian psyche that won't allow us somehow as a nation to reconcile with our First Nations, and that enables racism to fester. According to ASIO, I might just say more resources every year being expended on what they're calling ideologically motivated extremism, neo-Nazi, far-right, racist groups in Australia at their highest peak ever and rising, and we would all do well to heed this warning. Division and discrimination leads to hatred, and if Waverley, New South Wales, and Australia that we want is one of inclusion and equality, then let us confront racism directly, boldly, and truthfully, and let's do it now. We'll be a better country for it. Well done to you all, and thank you.
Hi. Well, look, I mean, what can I say? Thank you, Craig, very, very much for that. I think it's a stimulating call to arms, and I think Craig's absolutely right. One of the things we've learned over the last 2 years, if we didn't know it before, is that we are a society and we are all connected to each other. And that if we allow some to stumble, then all of us trip over. And it's, I think, very encouraging that now in the future, the framework of Waverley, in all its contradictions and wonder, there is a recognition of how we need to proceed. Okay, so I'm now going to throw things open to questions. I'm suggesting that I'm going to be fairly uncomfortable if people decide they're going to make long speeches. So we would like particular questions about what people have said, maybe short points that people want to make, but long speeches from the mount, probably not tonight. So I'm waiting for my friend Rebecca, who's out there somewhere, and Madly, who are going to, I think, manage this process. They keep promising me. So who's going to be the first question off the rank? There's silence. Someone's got to ask something. Who am I? Am I getting something, Rebecca? Well, I might ask a question. There you go. I can ask a question. I'm allowed as the chair. Mayor, over the next 3 to 4 years, in all that great package of crazy ideas that came out of the process of building the plan, which ones are you going to run with first? What's going to have the first impact on the people of Waverley? And don't forget to unmute. Paula, you'll need to unmute.
Go.
There you go.
My screen keeps changing, so the button moves. Look, it is an extraordinarily comprehensive policy. Andrew, and there are lots of really wonderful ideas in here. But I think in the first instance, it's really important that, as Joe said, and as you've said, and everyone has said, it's really important that this does not become a dust collector, that it's just a policy that stays on the shelf. I think it's absolutely essential that this becomes an action document. And we'll be looking at identifying some key things and looking at trying to allocate some budget to it in an ongoing way. But I think in the first instance, some of the things around leadership, but also in terms of the work that needs to be done within council, I think for me, become very important things to do. So I think we need to look at our own house to ensure that we're going to be able to implement the policy, but also ensure that council itself is, I think, presenting best practice in this space in the first instance. And if we actually have the resources internally, if we have the mindset, if we have the diversity within council, and that it is also being sponsored at the highest levels. And I really want to acknowledge Emily Scott in this, our general manager, who is has embraced this, and I know will be a key driver of this policy. Then if we've got that kind of buy-in, and of course the councillors and the mayor, and I'm hoping that whoever is mayor in the future, that this is something that will actually have bipartisan, tripartisan support. Multiculturalism used to, it unfortunately hasn't. And I think there is no room for any kind of political division on this. It is something that we all need to move forward on together. And I think that having the leadership with the mayor and the general manager and the rest of the councillors will be really critically important in doing that. So let's look at our own place, our own house, look at what kind of resourcing is going to be required, and then how we move forward, identifying those priorities. And hopefully, Andrew, that will give us some budgets and resources to implement some of your wonderful ideas, like the boardwalk. I just love that idea.
Okay, thanks, Paula. That's very kind of you. I was in fact going to ask why you weren't going to do the backgammon contest first up, but that's something else. Okay. On a more serious note, a couple of people have asked questions regarding the relationship between the emergence of neo-Nazism, ongoing anti-Semitism, and what can be done locally. What's the best way of responding to those sorts of issues? And I think they were fairly fired up by Craig. And perhaps, Craig, we can ask you then, how, in an area which has a very strong Jewish population with memories and realities in the present around anti-Semitism, where there's racism against all sorts of groups from the First Peoples, First Nations all the way through. How do you move forward on this? How do you bring together around these issues a population which is quite different amongst itself, so that they're working together against the sorts of prejudice and negativity that we find in this area?
You're talking about all of our different communities across Waverley? Yeah,
given that we have the question was triggered by a concern about rising anti-Semitism, but there were some other questions about the broader issues of racism and how we go about developing anti-racism campaigns. So I'm sort of knitting them all together and offering them to you. Sort of composite question.
Yeah, that's I think probably that's a seminar maybe, or a panel or a conference, but my simple answer would be that we all need to do our maximum, and particularly those of us in positions of privilege need to contribute. One of the things I really loved about the Black Lives Matter movement was that they coined this term, silence is violence, and that's absolutely true. And I don't think that people had internalized that previously. And therefore, those of us in positions of authority, of power, or of just social privilege, and privilege means just anti-bias, anti-prejudice, we have to be helping the others. We have to be prosecuting our own institutions, our own systems, our own thinking. Secondly, I think the media in Australia is an extreme concern at the moment, and it has been for a considerable amount of time. I think the way that minority communities might be, and racism exists across many communities in Australia. So racism against the Sudanese Australian youth, for example, that we saw in parts of News Limited was absolutely disgusting. A racism against the Muslim Australian population is horrendous. And racism against refugees, for example, of all backgrounds, is at the moment at an all-time low. I was going to say a high, but it's a low. So, we need to be bold enough as people to actually prosecute the concept of racism itself, okay? And that goes to every community, Andrew, okay? And so, if we're talking here about, Israel and Palestine, then there's issues on both sides there, and all of us have to recognize that racism exists in every community. In fact, one of the issues that we have, so we also have to talk about Palestinians. We have to talk about their treatment as well as that of, Israelis and our wonderful Jewish community. These are difficult discussions that Australia needs to have. We need to have it in terms of Indigenous Australians. We need it in relation to all of our minority communities. We need it in relation to religion. We have never been able to confront this in this country. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think it's time to do so. And that's going to take some courage, okay? That's going to take some real courage. And I'm interested in who are the community leaders across all of these different communities in Australia who have the courage to do that, who have the courage to be unbiased, who have the courage to be able to step forward and say, let's go back to the start here. Let's talk about the start of the country. And it's not easy. It's not easy for many of us. I'm the first among equals. Is things that we have in our life puts people in a position where they don't want to put those things at threat. I think it's time for us all to make sure that we are capable of stepping forward now. It's never been more important. Not in this country anyway, and not, as you said, with our wonderful Jewish Australian community, and anti-Semitism, which is a form of racism that we know, and a form of hatred, which is, well, of course, history shows that it's one of the greatest signs of how damaging hatred can be. But all communities have to have a voice. And I just want to make that clear here. Every single community here has to be heard. I'm very much in the middle in the sense that, I'm a white Anglo-Australian who grew up in a country area of Lismore in northern New South Wales. I come out of a very monocultural area, and I played football, and football brought me into a genuine multicultural community, and communities not where they felt that they needed to be a knocker. The Croatian Australian community, the Greek Australian community, the Italian Australian community, the Jewish Australian community with Hakoah Club down here, and wonderful history in football, all of the the Turkish Australian community, all of them. These were communities with very strong ties culturally, to their history, and therefore I got a very different sense of what the future of Australia looks like. A sense of working at SBS alongside Les Murray and others, a sense of real pride, deep pride in the history, pre-Australia, and deep pleasure and I think gratitude, although that's not necessary, but deep gratitude to what they were able to build here also in Australia. So I sit very much in the middle here, and I think that Australia is going to have to be brave here. We really are, and I hope that the time is right.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. It sort of echoes some of my feelings, I'm sure many others as well. One of the questions that's been asked for us, and maybe, I don't know, Joe, whether this is something to put to you, because it's a state government responsibility. One of our attendees, Walangari, has raised issues about juvenile justice, basically. He's kicking off from what's been happening in the Northern Territory. But there are all sorts of issues around juvenile justice and cultural diversity in Waverley, not as elsewhere, but as well as elsewhere. Is this something that local government can take on board in any sense? the experience of young people and occasionally the trouble they find themselves in, often not of their own making. I mean, what's your sense of this and what local government can do?
I think the role and the voice of young people is critical in any decision-making process. And I think it's not rocket science to say this, but often the voice is excluded because they're not old enough to vote, whether that's at the elections in 20 odd days time or the elections in 90 odd days or 100, whenever that guy announces them, or, in March 2023. I think the lived experience and the voice of young people, though, is critical. And I think what's happening in the Northern Territory at the moment is heartbreaking when you hear the statistics that the only people in juvenile detention are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That just I think blows all of us away, that you've got all of these prisons and establishments there for largely, as Craig said, not a whole society, but a very small population of society that ultimately should be one of the things that we cherish the most in this country, yet seems to have the worst statistics in terms of life expectancy and health complications and access to employment and so forth. So I think the role of local government is about if I can put it in a positive frame, I think it's about creating safe spaces for young people. I think it's about empowering them to have a voice. I think it's about programs that enable young people. And my first ever job was working for a local council in Victoria. And I say that with a great amount of pride because I never thought going to high school or university that I'd work in a local council. But the reality is I learned so much from about so many different facets of life that actually gave me a really good lived experience. And, no one grows up and says, I'm going to be the CEO of Multicultural New South Wales, particularly a family like mine where I'm the first person to ever go to university in a very long ancestral line that dates back to Pinocchio. So the reality of the situation is I think it's about creating safe spaces for young people. I think it's about the values of inclusion, and that's not just about cultural diversity. That's about, inclusion is the byproduct from creating the right environment for different ingredients of diversity to flourish. And then I think it's about making sure that they feel involved and empowered to be a part of whatever the policy decisions that the council's making, that they're encouraged to be a part of the democratic processes that exist in this country. And I think one of the points that was made before about neo-Nazis is neo-Nazis, they value hate. So racism is the byproduct of hate. They hate democracy. They hate difference. They hate anything that is threatening or creates a vulnerability in their own existence. And so one of the reasons that they probably target the Jewish community so much is because you are such an incredibly successful community that despite all of the atrocities that has been committed to you, you find ways to bond together and still celebrate that togetherness really proudly and really visually. And, Craig made an important point before. Neo-Nazis don't just hate a group. They are fundamentally, they love Islamophobia. They love xenophobia. They loved COVID. The whole reason that they thrived in COVID is because they tried to marginalize us and divide us and allow conspiracy theories and other things to pull us apart as a society. They don't want a democratic society to exist. That's fundamentally their aim. Their aim is to disrupt and corrupt what is a functioning and a cohesive democratic society. And I like what Craig said before. I say similar sorts of things. Be an upstander, not a bystander. Because if you're a bystander, then you're not part of the solution. And I think it's critical that all of us lean into this space and don't underestimate our own individual connections and networks and sorts of things to help be a part of that solution.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Sarah, whether I can throw it quickly to you on this. I know from Ellie that your group and the council has been talking with diverse young people in the last week or so. I don't know if you're in a position to say anything more about that at the moment.
I haven't actually been involved in that, Andrew.
Okay, well, I won't
Someone from
put you on the
council
spot,
might
sorry.
be here.
Okay,
But I could say about young people in Waverley and everywhere that they bring an incredibly strong focus on community and a lack of cynicism that they haven't developed over time, and that they are going to be our future decision makers and leaders. And so whatever opportunities we can get to work with young people and listen to them in a really authentic way is only going to benefit a diverse and inclusive society. And I love that inclusion is the byproduct of having the right ingredients for diversity to flourish. I'm going to steal that one. It's a really beautiful statement.
Oh, I think that's great. Thank you very much. I mean, one of the things that that struck me about it was what the really important role that Waverley as a community can play in welcoming the wider Sydney into, you know, a sort of into Australia. There are millions of Sydney-sideds who never really get into the, you know, into eastern areas, never enjoyed the beach, never know how it's going to work, and all the rest of it. And maybe that's one of the recommendations in the report, was to enable the council to partner with other communities in Western Sydney and elsewhere to open up some of those pathways so that people who would never envisage themselves understanding or being in this space could come here and meet the people who are here, and the people who are here meet them, and it sort of opens up communication and dialogue. Paula, do you want to make a comment on that, do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think it's a really important point, and I know that a number of our community institutions have commenced reaching out, and you know, organisations like the Tamarama Surf Club, for example, and the Bronte Surf Club, and I noted that the president of the Bronte Surf Club had joined us for a little while, already have programs where there is an outreach into ethnic communities and particularly some of the communities from out west. And I know that this is something that we have discussed at the MAC. And in fact, one of the MAC members, Tito, actually works at Blacktown Council, and we've been talking about how we can facilitate better interaction between Blacktown and Waverley, and in particular, accessing those communities. Now, the suggestion that I think it's Welcome to Waverley, I think is the program, Andrew. Look, I think that that's got, that is a really important initiative. I think it is something that we could probably action fairly quickly, tapping into a number of our existing community organisations. It wouldn't take that much to organise. It's really inspiring and encouraging our communities to do that. But again, like anything, it's what everyone's been saying. It's really about having someone in a position of leadership to drive this. And the fact that we've got it in our policy now is really important, because I think there's a lot of really good work that's actually happening on the ground, but it's very disparate. People, there's not necessarily a coordination point. People aren't necessarily aware of all the work that's actually happening, because Waverley is a very diverse community. It's also got quite a broad socioeconomic profile as well. And I think that that's something that the people lose sight of, and perhaps are a little frightened about wanting to go over in the years because, oh no, it's not for us. When in fact, there's so much here, and there is so much that we want to share and welcome people, partly because, you know, it's, you know, our commitment to social inclusion and connectedness and community resilience means that it's really vital and essential that this is something that we actually facilitate for all of Sydney. It's not just our one little pocket. If we're really serious about having a leadership role in this and having, you know, having a role of encouraging best practice, I should say, then we really have to live and talk walk the talk. And I think that something like this is absolutely fundamental.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that very positive comment. We've got about a minute or so left. And I just want to say one final thing, maybe if I can, if Madly and Rebecca and the others will let me make one comment. And Emily doesn't block her ears off while I say it. It's been really quite an extraordinary experience working on this project. We did discover many, many things, not the least of which was the great building bridges concept of the 1980s, which I had a vague memory of, but lost in the past. This was a point at which Indigenous, Maori, multicultural Anglo-Australian musicians and communities got together to celebrate the building of bridges between communities. And I know that one of the things that we've been suggesting very strongly as a symbol of a future Waverley is this notion of building bridges through music, through art, through culture, and through people opening up to each other. So hopefully that will be one of the great benefits. And I'm in fact taking time that I shouldn't have taken, but I will say one other thing. I'd really like to thank Craig and Joe and Sarah and Paula for putting themselves out there so powerfully and so honestly and so authentically tonight. I think that's been a really wonderful experience, feeling these sense of emotion and commitment, bridging the space of this strange, what do we call it now, a Zoom-like world in which we currently live. And hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll actually be able to meet one another in the real world again and continue these conversations and building. And for those of the many people who I met on this voyage who are here tonight, I would like to extend my extraordinary thanks for your commitment and for your willingness to put up with me questioning and probing and asking and following. And hopefully you feel that Ellie, myself, Sarah and the others have done what you wanted in bringing this forward, and the council has been able to hear your voices and turn it into a pathway into the future. So can I thank you all again very, very much. I think our time is up. I'm sure someone will turn off the machine. You will all be getting emails from the organisers sometime in the near future, which will ask you for feedback and for ask for any further questions you have, feedback and so on. If you want to, more than what we'd like you to read the strategy, look at its detail, find something in it that really amazes and excites you, and become a standard bearer for what it can produce in Waverley over the next years to come. Thank you very much. And Rebecca, I think this is where you turn off the switch.